Yesterday, President Trump signed the Hong Kong Autonomy Act and announced a series of actions through a presidential executive order. As he said in May, if China treats Hong Kong as one country and a single system, so must we. General Secretary Xi Jinping made a choice to violate the Chinese Communist Party's promises to Hong Kong that were made in a UN-registered treaty. He didn't have to do that. He made that choice. We have to deal with China as it is, not as we wish it to be. Other nations are arriving at the same conclusion.
美方不顾中方严正交涉，将美国国会通过的所谓香港自治法案签署成法，恶意诋毁香港国家安全立法，威胁对中方实施制裁，严重违反国际法和国际关系基本准则，
是对香港事务和中国内政的粗暴的干涉，
进一步暴露美国一些政客反中乱港的丑恶嘴脸，遭到国际社会的广泛质疑和正义人士的强烈谴责。美方妄图借所谓涉港法案威胁中国，是痴人说梦，注定徒劳。
美方阻挠实施香港国安法的图谋永远不可能得逞。
Australia and Canada have suspended their extradition treaties with the territory. I leave on Monday for a quick trip to the United Kingdom and to Denmark, and I'm sure that the Chinese Communist Party and its threat to free peoples around the world will be high on top of that agenda. We'll certainly take time to discuss the UK's commendable decision to ban Huawei gear from its 5G networks and phase out the equipment from its existing networks. The UK joins the United States and now many other democracies in becoming clean countries, nations free of untrusted 5G vendors. In the same way, many major telecom companies like Telefonica, Telco Italia, and NTT have become clean carriers. After my London stop, I'm equally excited to meet with my counterparts from the Kingdom of Denmark. It'll be a wonderful trip. The United States has a Huawei announcement of our own today. The State Department will impose visa restrictions on certain employees of Chinese technology companies like Huawei that provide material support to regimes engaging in human rights violations and abuses globally.
美国是这个地球上最大的名副其实的黑客帝国。蓬佩奥国务卿用清洁与否来评判华为，我觉得是非常可笑的。华为作为一家那么优秀的民营企业，它唯一的错就是它是中国的。美方的所作所为跟清洁二字没有任何关系，他做的其实是真正的 dirty trick、dirty play。
The last note on China. On Monday, for the first time, we made our policy on the South China Sea crystal clear. It's not China's maritime empire. If Beijing violates the international law and free nations do nothing, then history shows that the CCP will simply take more territory. That happened in the last administration. Our statement gives significant support to ASEAN leaders who have declared that the South China Sea disputes must be resolved through international law, not might makes right. What the CCP does to the Chinese people is bad enough, but the free world shouldn't tolerate Beijing's abuses as well.
美国作为世界上最发达的国家、最强大的国家，动辄制裁，不免让人觉得非常的可悲。美方应该好好反思他的政策。但说到制裁中国，也不怕树欲静而风不止。如果美国想兴风作浪的话，那就让暴风雨来得更猛烈些好了。
Yesterday, in his lengthy remarks, President Trump indicated that it's been quite some time since he last spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping. This suggests that there is effectively no engagement between our two countries at top levels. It seems that just about every day or several times a week, one or the both of you announce some incremental new measure aimed at punishing the Chinese regime. But I don't think, as you stand there right now, that you can tell us that over the several months this has been going on without this form of engagement, that there's been any discernible change in China's conduct. So are you essentially tilting at windmills with these various incremental steps? And then I have a follow-up.
Why don't you ask your second one, and I'll take them both, James.
If you don't mind, I'd prefer to ask it separate. They're very separate.
I do mind. If you'll ask the second one, I'll get to it.
In our interview a little over a year ago, Mr. Secretary, I asked you if you considered Iran to be an evil regime, and you said quite simply, yes. I'm wondering if, as a member of the Trump administration, as a seasoned student of and practitioner of international relations, or simply as a devout Christian, you regard China as an evil regime.
So let me take the first one. You began by saying that, as the president said yesterday, he hasn't talked to Xi Jinping in quite some time. I think the call was in March, if I remember correctly, but I'll defer to the White House on the last time they've spoken. But there has been high-level conversation. I traveled to Hawaii. Now it seems like a little while ago, but it was just a few weeks back where I met with Wang Zhishe. We continue to have a dialogue and conversations at every level within the State Department. It's happening in other agencies across the U.S. government, too. So there's a significant amount of conversation between the two countries. What's important, James, is that conversation has changed. That conversation is different than we've had, frankly, for decades between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. It is no longer, and I think Chinese leadership understand it is no longer the case that it's going to be acceptable that the United States is simply going to allow the important commercial relationships that we have between our two countries to put the American people at risk. And that's what had happened. This isn't political. This is multiple administrations across both of the major political parties, where for an awful long time our policy simply reflected allowing China to engage in behavior that was radically unreciprocal, enormously unfair to the American people, and frankly put America's national security at risk. And so we have begun to turn that around. There is still real work that needs to be done, but you can see in each of the policies that the administration undertaken in the last 2.5 years, a marked reversal. In terms of Chinese behavior, how have they responded? You've seen the language that they use. You can see that we're having a real impact, and we will continue to do the things we need to do to make sure that the American people are safe and secure, and that we have a set of fair and reciprocal relationships. That's the end state desire. We want good things for the people of China. We have a Chinese Communist Party that is putting freedom and democracy at risk by their expansionist, imperialist, authoritarian behavior. That's the behavior that we're trying to see changed. We've still got work to do. This is a regime that failed to disclose information they had about a virus that's now killed over 100,000 Americans, hundreds of thousands across the world, cost the global economy trillions and trillions of dollars, and now is allowing the World Health Organization to go in to conduct what I am confident will be a completely whitewashed investigation. The reason, I hope I'm wrong, I hope it's a thorough investigation that gets fully to the bottom of it. I've watched the Chinese Communist Party's behavior with respect to the virus that emanated from Wuhan, and they have simply refused. They've destroyed samples, they've taken journalists and doctors who were prepared to talk about this and not permitted them to do what nations that want to play on a truly global scale and global stage ought to do: be transparent and open and communicate and cooperate. And the Chinese use that word. The Chinese Communist Party talks about win-win and cooperation. Cooperation isn't about nice language or summits or meetings between foreign ministers. It's about actions. And that's the expectation that we are setting for the Chinese Communist Party. We need to see fair, reciprocal responses. We're hopeful that they'll complete their requirements under the Phase 1 trade deal. And we're hopeful that we'll see changes in the behavior across the entire spectrum where they have unfairly treated America for far too long. Your second question was about China and how we use language. I'll leave my comments about China precisely where I just left them. The previous
Evil regime.
I appreciate your question. I'm going to leave my comments for today precisely where I will tell you the things that are happening on a human rights scale I've described as the stain of the century. I stand by those remarks.
美方呢，虽然整天把人权挂在嘴边，但实际上，美国才是这个世界上最大的人权侵犯者。美国关于中国的人权问题的指控是本世纪最大的谎言，美方的有关官员应该为他们感到羞耻。我觉得美国的媒体和美国的人民也应该为他们拥有这样的官员满口的谎言感到难过。
Two questions, if I may. The first one is on China and Iran. The second one is on China and Taiwan. I would like to, what is your assessment of the prospective trade and military partnership between Iran and China? And how would you respond to criticism that the U.S. sanctions have further strengthened the alliance between the two countries? And separately, if I may, on Taiwan and China, what is your comment on China's threats to impose sanctions on American company Lockheed Martin over U.S. arms sale to Taiwan? What is the calculation of the State Department when it approved the arms sale to Taiwan? And should U.S. companies be punished when the U.S. government is implementing the Taiwan Relations Act? Thank you.
Yeah. So your second question is easy. No, of course not. We had an American company conducting business that was consistent with American foreign policy, the policy of the arms sales that we made to Taiwan. I regret that the Chinese Communist Party chose to make that threat against Lockheed Martin. It's not the first time they've chosen to do that to an American contractor who was working on a program that was between the United States and Taiwan. So I regret that. I hope they'll reconsider that and not follow through on the remarks that were made yesterday or the day before when they made them. Your first question was about Iran and China. I mean, well, a little history is in order, right? Think about a long time ago, Persia. The relationship, this is not brand new. But I think what you saw in the reporting there, and something we've been following, is evidence of a couple simple things. First, the need to extend the arms embargo. Right? Now we have reporting that suggests that not only when the arms embargo will expire does the Secretary of State of the United States believe that China will sell weapon systems to Iran, but the Iranians believe that China will sell systems to Iran. And indeed, they have been working on it, waiting for this day, waiting for midnight on October 18th for this arms embargo to expire. I think Europeans should stare at that and realize that the risk of this is real, and that the work between Iran and the Chinese Communist Party may well commence rapidly and robustly on October 19th if we're not successful at extending the UN arms embargo. As for the larger picture, we have a set of sanctions related to any company or country that engages in activity with Iran. The sanctions are clear. We have been unambiguous about enforcing them against our companies from allies, countries from all across the world. We would certainly do that with respect to activity between Iran and China as well.
I know you commended the UK's decision on Huawei. The decision is very much based on US sanctions, and the policy may change if the US sanctions change. Is there any idea for a review on those sanctions?
Your first question was the British decision with respect to Huawei yesterday. We were happy about it. Faster is always better to get this equipment out of their system. It's a security risk. This isn't about commercial interests. This is about protecting the information, in this case, of the United Kingdom's people. You suggested they did this because of U.S. sanctions. I don't actually think that's true. I actually think they did this because their security teams came to the same conclusion that ours have, is that you can't protect this information. This information that transits across these untrusted networks that are of Chinese origin will almost certainly end up in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think they did this for the right reasons. I think they did this to protect and preserve and secure the freedoms of the people of the United Kingdom. And I'm confident they'll continue in that policy. I think Prime Minister Johnson got complete right end of the stick on this one. I'm pleased to see that, and I'm pleased to see this is happening all across the world.
他不可能扼杀掉这个我们的这个，不可能扼杀掉我们，因为这个世界离不开我们，因为我们比较先进。
世界很大，英国地方还比较小，所以我想不管怎么样，这个禁令它不会阻止华为的发展。
The tide is turning. I remember questions from you all a year and a half ago that said, "Oh my goodness, it's just the United States." I think the work that's been done and the work that we've enabled to be done all across the world is now making clear to everyone, and that there is a real security risk. Now every nation is simply asking the question, how do you do it? What are the commercial impacts? How quickly can you move in that direction? And how do we ensure that we have available cost-effective solutions that don't subject our people to the risk that comes from having this infrastructure inside of the countries? I think in fact the tide has turned there, and you'll see this continue in countries all across the world. And you're seeing the world's biggest telecom providers share in this same concern. I listed a few today. I listed a few the last time I was up here. Maybe it was the time before. you're seeing private telco providers understand the risk that their companies bear from putting these untrusted vendors in their networks as well.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, sir.
Just one question.
With two parts, right?
No, and what should we infer from your statement on the South China Sea? I mean, the fait accompli that China has created in the South China Sea, they remain in place. They remain fait accompli. The fishing fleet, the maritime militia, they continue to operate in waters considered disputed. What are your expectations? What should we infer are your expectations of China following this, strengthened U.S. position?
Yeah. So after extensive legal review, the State Department for the first time made clear what we believe the law reflects. This is how the United States operates all across the world. And so we set down very clearly the markers that says these are the legal requirements. So we will then go use the tools that we have available, and we will support countries all across the world who recognize that China has violated their legal territorial claims as well, or maritime claims as well. And we'll go provide them the assistance we can, whether that's in multilateral bodies, or whether that's in ASEAN, whether that's through legal responses. We'll use all the tools we can. You use the term fait accompli. I think things have shifted dramatically in the region. I think you're seeing countries all throughout Asia, and indeed in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific, recognizing that the United States is prepared to do the things necessary to assist them in protecting their valid legal claims. So I think it was really important. The statement we made on Monday, I think, was very, very important in not only demarcating the United States position, but making clear that we'll support other nations of the region that do a similar thing with respect to protecting their capacity to preserve the maritime boundaries that their people are entitled to.
早在1948年，中国政府就正式公布了南海断续线，在很长时间里没有受到任何国家质疑。中国在南海的领土主权和海洋权益有充分的历史和法理依据，符合有关国际法和国际实践。中方从来不谋求在南海建立海洋帝国，始终平等对待南海周边国家。
You spoke earlier about how much the U.S. relationship with China has changed over the last few decades. I'm wondering if you consider India an increasingly important trade and military partner, and if those conversations are happening at a high level.
Your first question was about India, and you started with the predicate of our relationship with China has changed. I think it's worth noting the reason for that change is the Chinese Communist Party's behavior. That's important. I listened to some of the narrative that flows out of China, some of the disinformation, and people use language like tit for tat. These aren't tit for tat exchanges. This is America standing up for its own people, and the world now coming to understand the threat that the Chinese Communist Party. So to the extent there's been a change in relationship, it is a direct result of the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party. And so when that stops, we'll do that. India's been a great partner. I'm going to speak to the U.S.-India Business Council here in a couple of hours, I think, or maybe it's this afternoon now. They're an important partner of ours. I have a great relationship with my foreign minister counterpart. We talk frequently about a broad range of issues. We talked about the conflict they had along their border with China. We've talked about the risk that emanates to China from Chinese telecommunications infrastructure there. You saw the decision they made to ban several dozen Chinese software firms from operating inside of their country on the phones of people operating inside of India. I think the whole world is coalescing around the challenge that we face, and the democracies, the free nations of the world, will push back on these challenges together. I'm very confident of that.